Bonjour à tous, bon midi et bienvenue à cette troisième édition des dîners-causeries organisés par Xn Québec. Je suis Mahalia Verna, présidente du comité Équité et inclusion d'Xn Québec et j'ai le grand plaisir d'être la modératrice de cette série de conversations qui ont pour but d'outiller les membres des industries créatives pour les accompagner dans leur réflexion par rapport à l'équité et l'inclusion, l'appartenance et l'accès dans nos industries. Alors, aujourd'hui, nous discuterons du portrait de la diversité des auditoires au Canada en élaborant sur une recherche très importante initiée par le Bureau de l'écran des Noirs, connu en anglais sous le nom de Black Screen Office. Juste une petite note, tout au long de notre conversation, je vous invite à soumettre vos questions dans le chat qui sera géré par l'équipe d'Xn Québec. Avant de poursuivre, j'aimerais prendre un moment afin de reconnaître aujourd'hui que notre conférence est diffusée à partir de Tiohtià:ke, Montréal, et se déroule sur les terres autochtones non cédées de la Gagnigaha, la nation Mohawk. Alors, maintenant, je vais vous présenter notre invitée spéciale, Joan Jenkinson. Elle est la directrice générale, la première directrice générale du Bureau de l'écran des Noirs, le Black Screen Office, où elle soutient les Canadiens d'origine afrodescendante, travaillant dans les industries cinématographiques par le biais de la défense des intérêts, de la recherche, de la programmation, du financement et du développement de carrière. Elle s'est engagée à créer les conditions d'un succès à long terme en abordant l'égalité raciale et l'inclusion. Notre conversation se déroulera en anglais, alors sans plus tarder, welcome Joan. So happy to be able to have this time with you to talk about the Black Screen Office and its work with regards to audiences across Canada. So thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started diving into your really rich presentation, would you like to say a few words?
I'd like to thank you, Mahalia, for moderating today, and thank you to Xn Quebec for the invitation. It's my introduction to the organization, and I'm thrilled to be able to meet some of the people who are the leadership of the organization, and really look forward to spending some time with you today.
That's wonderful. That's great. So let's dive in.
Okay. There we go.
Yep.
So we're the Black Screen Office. We've been around since November 2020, not very long ago. It feels like 10 years. But we came into being because when, for us, the greatest civil rights movement was happening, and many people were making statements about what they were going to do about it and how they would be involved. I came together with a group of Black content creators who were producers and creatives in the industry who were among the most senior, and talked about what our experiences had been and what we as a group could say to the industry ourselves. And that through many different, for many different reasons, ended up forming the Black Screen Office. And we knew from the very beginning that our core issue was around anti-Black racism. And that, in fact, anti-Black racism is the root of a systemic racism, and that runs very deep in Canada. Other politicians, particularly in Quebec, might want you to believe otherwise, but we've certainly had the experience, and we know that the issue of racism is not going to be really addressed until you address anti-Black racism, because we know that there have been blatantly unfair outcomes for Black people since we've been in Canada, which is many years, many generations, by the way.
Absolutely.
So our mission is to build careers, to build strengthen networks, and to share our stories to the world, we've had very few opportunities to do that. I was speaking to one of the showrunner of the show, the next Overlords and the Underworlds, which is a series that's going to be premiering on CBC in a couple of weeks. It is the first comedy made by and about Black people in the history of Canadian television on major networks. And it is only the second one in Canadian television at all. So it just,
Wow.
when we say that, also I'll just say too that there have only been 4 dramatic TV series by and about Black people in the history of Canadian television on any channel.
Oh, wow. Joan, in terms of comedy, was the first one The Kinking My Hair?
Yes.
Okay.
That was on Global.
On Global, yeah. Wow, second one. Wow, I'm shocked, but I guess I shouldn't be at the same time. But therefore the need for Black Screen Office and all these initiatives that have, really taken off in the past year and a half, I would say.
It's only been 10 months for us that we've been around. So I guess the movement itself has been a little bit longer. We have some guiding principles that we think are very important to us. We have a healthy disregard for the impossible, refuse to accept the status quo, and believe that there are no limits to what Black Canadians can accomplish in the screen industries. We are unapologetically by and for all Black Canadians. We're an organization that believes in the power of Black leadership and talent, and we recognize that there are multiple Black communities and identities in Canada, and we are home for all. While I say that, though, I have to say that most of the things that we've done so far have been for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. But we started out first and foremost by looking at what is it that we need, where are the gaps, where are the successes and failures, and started from there.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Joan, with the research that we're going to be delving into today, I mean, that is a demonstration about how the Black Screen Office, yes, is first and foremost about Black Canadians, but also is involved in collaborations that help, as we say, lift all boats, right?
Right, yes, for sure. So again, we've only been around for a little while, but we've done quite a bit during that time. So I just want to share a little bit of that before we dive into the question that we're all here to discuss, which is about audience research. So recently we launched a program that Rogers Media funded. They provided $750,000 over the next 3 years for script development. And again, we extended it beyond Black people within the screen industries to include people of color, LGBTQ2+, and people with disabilities. We did not include Indigenous people because if you've been listening to the news at all, the federal budget allotted $40 million for the Indigenous community to support narrative sovereignty. And so, but we're excited about this program. The winners will be announced at the end of October for this round, but there will be another one next year as well. We've also teamed up with Story Hive. This year they're doing a Black edition, and they're giving 20 filmmakers $20,000 to do a short film that they will fund, that they'll distribute on the TELUS platform, which is huge to have produced credit. And they'll provide mentorship and training through the National Screen Institute. So the deadline was I think yesterday. So too late for that one. But again, hopefully there'll be more in the future. We also have a relationship with Bell Media, where we're doing a first of its kind incubator program for pre-development. So we've selected English and French writers and producers who are going to work on an anthology series that will be bilingual. That means some episodes will be in English and some in French. And again, it brings the French and English together in terms of working together within the industry, but also bringing audiences from one network to the other, bridging the gap, because Bell is bilingual and wants to wants everybody to know that. Uh,
Mhm. Joan, just one question in terms of partnerships, because there's also the Indigenous Screen Office. So are there collaborations between the two?
we have had collaborations where we've been involved in the same projects. The Indigenous Screen Office brought us in to work with them when they were doing the Amazon pitch program. Again, we haven't been around for very long, so there haven't been that many opportunities. But the Indigenous Screen Office is also has a couple of members on our advisory group for the audience survey, and we try and collaborate as much as possible. They've now had this influx of money, so they've been, scaling up and organizing themselves so that they can distribute that money in a very short period of time.
Okay, great.
So we're also on the same vein involved with industry transformation groups. These are racial equity groups who have come together to ensure that we're working in solidarity and collaboration, and that we can help lift each other up as we move in this journey. So one of the key things, one of the pillars of what we do is advocacy. We are here to enact systemic change. We see a lot of things happening right now that seem to be a reaction to the need for racial equity and inclusion, but we want to advocate for sustainability, for a commitment long-term, and that we will make people accountable along the way. So we're working with federal and provincial agencies, funders, broadcast undertakings, as well as provincial agencies like Ontario Creates and BC Creative BC, because we feel it's important that we all participate together, that we start using the same language and making that same commitment that we want to make sure is long term.
Hmm. And Joan, I mean, I know you say it's only been 10 months, but I'd be curious to know, like, how has it been? Like, have all these partners at the various levels of government, what's been their level of engagement, would you say?
I'd say that they're highly, highly engaged. We've been approached by people to work with them, uh, including funders who want to develop programming with us. I have to tell you, I've been in the industry for a very, very, very long time. And it just shocks my system sometimes when I think about all the attention that we're getting now, because it's not anything new that we've been saying. But I certainly appreciate all the support that we've been getting, and that doors are open and people are listening.
Great.
So we have 3 studies on the go right now. Before I started this job, there's no way you could have had me believe that I'd be so heavily involved with research and with data. But as soon as we started, we realized that there's no data, like nobody literally had anything. So we had to start from scratch because we didn't know, how to assess the work that funding agencies had done in terms of supporting content from underrepresented groups. We had no idea about audiences or what broadcasters were commissioning. Literally, there was nothing. And I think it was just a huge embarrassment for the industry to realize that there had been such neglect.
So Joan, like in kind of the audit phase of this, any information as to why we did not have data prior to this in Canada? Because it's surprising when we compare with other markets that really thrive on collecting data of audiences. So why was the situation different in Canada?
I know, like in the United States, when we did our survey, our landscape scan of what was out there. The United States is like 100 times better than we are. They capture everything, and for many years they've realized how important it is. But we haven't here. I think nobody cared. Nobody was prepared to open their minds to the idea that there might be systemic racism. And I think there are a few initiatives here and there that were spoken, but like literally, it's like people had to be slapped upside of the head to realize that, you know, we have to get on the program. If we're saying that we want change, then the only way we can do that is by actually figuring out what's happening and seeing what's happening. And in these very early stages, we're certainly seeing that very little has been happening. And maybe that's the reason, is that because there's so little, it wasn't worth counting.
Wow.
So this first study that we launched, jumped into a few months ago, is about creating authentic and inclusive content. And we've been supported by Telefilm, Bell Fund, Shaw Rocket Fund, Ontario Creates, and CBC. And I have to tell you that they just jumped on board. It wasn't a hard sell, because all these agencies and funders and broadcasters are grappling with, well, how do we create authentic and inclusive content? And even people who are part of the underrepresented groups realize that I, as a Black person, cannot tell a South Asian story without some guidelines of how to get there. And so we're coming up with, I mean, we've done a lot of focus groups. We've spoken to over 400 individuals who have told us what their experiences are in the industry as far as representation goes and what they would like to see changed. So we'll be doing like a big report that shows all the common themes for all the underrepresented groups that we spoke to, but we'll also be doing individual reports for Black, people of color, LGBTQ2+, people living with disabilities as well. And again, I have to say that we left out the Indigenous community, because this study was inspired by theirs, which is called Pathways and Protocols, which is being used widely throughout the industry. And
Right. And that's what, and actually it is that that study that then has helped inform like the decisions around the funding, that the pockets of funding that have been created for Indigenous talent and storytelling over the years, right?
yes, also, you know, whose story is it to tell? This is going to be for all the groups, but I think the Indigenous community really, you know, put this to the forefront first. If it's an Indigenous story, why isn't an Indigenous person telling it? Why is anybody else telling it? And for those shows that are not initiated by Indigenous people, and you know, again, now with all underrepresented groups, like how are you going to ensure that the representation among your leaders and showrunners and writers and that those voices are in the room? Is it through consultants? Is it to making sure that you have other writers and producers engaged in the process? But also for funders to make decisions on what they move forward with. They're going to be looking at representation to ensure that anything they're commissioning or funding will be following these guidelines. So this is what a part of our advocacy really is, to be proactive in providing this information for content creators.
Great.
So this, I'm just running through a couple things. The second study that we will be launching in a couple of weeks is called Fade to Black, looking at Black Canadians throughout the screen industry. And it's a market intelligence survey that will be an evidence-based data on Black participation, training, challenges, successes and failures, people who want to come into the industries, what their barriers might be. Because we felt that starting out this journey, we really needed to know the people who we serve. And as we've been moving forward, we're finding that other agencies and organizations are saying, we need this information too, because if we're saying that we want that inclusion and equity is important, then we have to know who it is that we're including. And for us, we decided that, you know, of course, we would focus on the Black community. So getting to today's topic, our National Race-Based Audience Survey. We are about a quarter of the way into the study. We commissioned Ipsos because they're a very large research company, and they had some proprietary tools that we felt would be useful for the study. And because it's national, they had enough of panels and focus groups and people like that who they could call on. We are finding, though, that for all these studies as we're moving forward, we have to do a rethink on how we approach research. Research is, a male-dominated area for, since its inception. So anytime we come up with a question for a questionnaire or a question for a focus group participant, we have to go back and filter it through the lens of equity and inclusion. And there's a lot that we have to be mindful of, a lot that we have to course correct on as we move forward. So I think in a lot of ways, this study will be a case study in and of itself of what we can learn about how to do research if the research is going to be inclusive. So this one, again, is about the media preferences and consumption of Black, Indigenous, people of color. We've also included LGBTQ2+ and people with disabilities in our demographic information. And we're looking at things that we've never looked at before. So it's what are they consuming? Why? What platforms are they using? What are their perceptions about representation? And so we're doing disaggregated data, getting as much information as we possibly can about these audiences who have been invisible up to this point.
Joan, I have a question for you, because I just want to jump off the point that you were making about, in a sense, like decolonizing research. How, with that in mind, how is Ipsos, I guess, going beyond perhaps the traditional ways of finding the participants and whatnot? Like, can you talk a little bit more about the process?
Sure. I'll go anyway. So what we did first off was to strike two advisory groups. One were stakeholders and funders, broadcasters, and then the other advisory group are Black, Indigenous, and people of color from the TV and film and digital media industries. People who are much more connected to what those audiences, who they are, because they represented them. And it's interesting that both of those advisory groups come up with very, very different advice about where to take the study. And so we've spent a lot more time than would normally be spent on creating questions for focus groups and creating the questionnaire that will be going out to 1,000 people shortly. Because there's it's almost everything you have to think about, think from the beginning. Things like combining phrases like racialized / people of color. Well, there's so many things that need to be unpacked in that, because racialized doesn't include Indigenous people. It is a verb, where people of color is a noun. Those things are not synonymous in any way. And that goes to the heart of how little we all know about how to move forward. And we're all working on it together. It's not to say that we as communities, BIPOC communities know everything. That's certainly not true. But we're testing ourselves all the time, like asking ourselves, reflecting, and making sure that as much as possible, we are checking that, colonialist mindset that we've all been conditioned into.
Absolutely.
So we started out by saying that there's no data, and that is exactly why this is important. There's no measurement. We don't know anything about audience characteristics or demographics. We don't know what their preferences are in terms of the media that they watch. We don't know what they watch, how they watch it, what they watch it on. And we also don't have any kind of reasonable representation on screen and what the attitudes are about people who are underrepresented around that issue. So overall, the purpose of the research is to empower underrepresented groups to move forward with greater confidence to drive change. So we can say, we will be able to say, these are the audiences across Canada, French and English, you know, at all different income scales and educational levels. And this is, as I said, an invisible group. Nothing has been captured about those audiences as if they didn't count. And we want to count them because we think that they are really influential and important in the change that we want to see in our industry.
Mm-hmm.
So how we'll do it, I already mentioned a couple of these things. One is the qualitative research and the proprietary tool that Ipsos has is called a digital ethnography. It's a daily diary that a select group of participants do for 3 days. And it's written content, video content, photographs, whatever they want to do to show us what they've been watching throughout those 3 days and what they've been thinking about that content. So it gives us a really, really deep understanding of what the media consumption is. And even though it's a small group, it's a very representative group across the country. And so we've just finished that phase and we've got a lot of really great information from that. It's really great when you go outside of your industry, and there's so many of us who know each other and have known each other for a long time that we kind of know what we think, but we don't know what the people, the community thinks, the people who are the audiences out there. So it's been very eye-opening to hear some of that.
Joan, just want to know, like, when you say it was eye-opening, what would you say for yourself was like the most eye-opening takeaway that you saw?
Okay, there's two things. One is like the passion that they have around these things and around representation. That, you know, some of the participants said, we wish we could be doing this all together because, you know, I feel like they feel like they need a support group to go through this because it's very, especially in the being seen focus groups, because we had large groups of people on Zoom calls seeing each other. The vulnerability that people had with the stories that they shared and how emotionally impactful it is for them to not see themselves and to be invisible, to not have any role models that they can look up to. And we've had an ongoing motto of, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And that's particularly true of children. The other thing I've seen is it was interesting what the difference is between men and women and what their responses were. And this probably has nothing to do with the study, but a funny thing that I found was that men, when they're asked what characters do they admire, women admired or were gravitated towards people who were altruistic, who were philanthropic, who did good work for the world. And men were attracted to characters who were superheroes. I thought that was really funny. But it has nothing to do with anything really about this study.
Perhaps something worth studying at some point, you know, what influences that in one's journey, right? Like the models that we gravitate towards while growing up, probably it's anchored in that, but wow, that's great.
It's also like really, I guess the other serious takeaway is that these things are important to people and they're actually thinking. It's not, you know, us just, you know, putting it in front of them and having them react. We have a lot of open-ended questions where they can do and say what they want, and that's what they wanted to talk about. So the second approach is the quantitative research, which is the audience measurement part. We're in the middle of just putting together our 20-minute questionnaire, which, as I said, is, has taken some really deep thinking and rethinking and course correcting about what these questions are going to be, to make sure that we reach the right people and we're getting the right information at the end of the day. And again, this is 1,000 people across Canada, French and English, and in both French and English content across the country. We've been investigating perceptions, misconceptions, and expectations. And so first we've looked at identity, how Black, Indigenous people of color identify themselves. And that includes Anglophone and Francophone, inside and outside Quebec. And the role of media for them in the immediate environment and then in the larger context. And then the interaction they have with media, how that's changed over time. Now that we have more devices to use, different platforms, the possibility of getting content from different countries, we are going to, again, look very deeply about what people are using and how they're using it in society today.
Mm-hmm. And Joan, I just want to say that because it's going to look at a diversity of platforms, this data and these takeaways are really going to be beneficial for all content creation industries, right, across the board. Like, it's not just going to be like for TV, radio, or whatnot. Like, it's, even our membership at Xn Québec, which is in the creative industries, will be able to benefit from that intel, right?
Yeah, everyone will benefit. I think, yeah, so we're doing film, TV, digital media. We're also doing podcasts, but we've left it open for the respondents to tell us what they're consuming rather than leading them in any particular direction. So we will be hearing about gaming. And when we started, we didn't think about adding podcasts, but as we spoke to our advisory group, some said, well, I only listen to podcasts. So you're going to miss me if you don't include me in that form of content. So we're looking at content preferences when it comes to diversity and representation. We're looking at their perceptions of current content, what drives their consumption, whether representation is important to them, whether it's important to them who owns the IP, like who's actually making the content, and what their desire is for alternative content, and if they can't find it, where they go to find it. And we're looking at, well, when it comes to diversity and representation, who should be driving the change? Should it be government? Should it be broadcasters? Should individual content creators be responsible for it? So we're throwing it out there to ask that question as well. So we've had some early observations. As I said, we've only done the quantitative part of the survey, and these are very, very early findings. They will, of course, all be captured in a report that will be available in early 2020, probably in February. So some of the key observations are that audiences are recognizing the evolving cultural landscape of diversity and inclusion in media. For most, inclusion is not a choice. It's like, of course, you have to do it. It's something that's a foundational expectation. We've discovered, surprisingly, that older generations have a stronger sense of a shared identity, which is important to them, whereas younger people have, as we say, have the I within the we when it comes to their consumption, and what they're interested in is more about them than about a community. So the role of media as a navigational one, it's helping audiences, ascertain their own identity and reflect on their own personal values. It helps them to define themselves, define their sense of selves and their sense of belonging in the world. And people have often said it so far in our study that inauthentic content is really noticeable. That if you're just going to throw people of color and Black and Indigenous people into storylines, it's obvious when the story is not built from the ground up, when it's just done for the sake of visually being able to count who's on screen. The final key observation is around the challenges that audiences see in terms of diverse representation. And one is attempts to tokenize diversity, where some feel that maybe it's just being used for publicity purposes, again, just to put some different faces on screen. Some question the willingness of producers and broadcasters to make the funds available to create this content. And often when it is made, there's poor quality because not enough money has been put into it. We know that broadcasters are driven by business imperatives, and that appealing to the mass is what's important to them. But increasingly, we're hearing people say, well, we don't want the same old thing. We want fresh and interesting content. We've seen successes of programs like I May Destroy You or Small Acts and other programming like that, that people are saying that are, completely outside of the box. They're garnering huge acclaim and attention and audiences because it's not the usual procedural that we've been fed for so many years. And then finally, there's a lack of writers because they haven't been trained up, they haven't been involved in writing rooms, and these are things that we have to work on changing. And we haven't been seeing actors and characters on screen because, again, there isn't a pipeline of these actors and various characters that are on the screen just because they haven't had the opportunity to be on the screen. So I just wanted to give you, just read to you a couple of quotes from the people that we've spoken to, just to give some of the heart of what it is that that's being, information that's being shared with us. One quote is from a woman who has two sons. One is 20 and the other one is 10. Her older son, she says, my older son never felt confident about himself, about his skin color. But my younger son feels no different than his white friends. This is because I have made a conscious choice of getting him to watch content that is reflective of who he is, and that it is normal to not look like most of his classmates in school. And the second one is old ways of thinking, talking, and doing. Generations of individuals have been taught that we cannot respect what is different. We can mock it, hate it, ignore it, or in many cases, get rid of it. I can only hope that with time, how we think of ourselves and others will finally reflect what is really good about the world, about our species. Fingers crossed. And so finally, the last thing is, with all these studies that we're doing, we are making sure that at the end, we have enough resources for what we call knowledge mobilization. We want these reports to be in the hands of as many people in the industry as possible. We want the studies to be on people's desks and not on their shelves, because they will see the value of it and it will be valuable to them in the work that they're doing. So we'll be doing multiple presentations like this one, workshops, focus groups. We will be working specifically with broadcasters to have workshops with various staff members within their organizations. Because, as I said, we don't want to do research for research's sake. We don't want to collect data that nobody uses. These are, our hope is to make these living documents that will be, again, are part of the advocacy and the work that needs to be done within the industry.
So Joan, would that, you were talking about workshops for those various stakeholders. Is what you have in mind like an onboarding process so that then they internally they take action on this? So, so as to address, as you were saying, that it's not a report that, just sits in someone's inbox or on their desktop. Is that what it would look like in a sense?
Yeah, we're definitely looking at action being taken. Again, this data doesn't exist, especially with the one that we're talking about now with audiences. So we are, our plan is to engage broadcasters, advertisers, distributors, anyone that deals with audiences to recognize that this is an audience that's been overlooked, and you need to have those reflected in the content that you're making and how you're marketing it, and the advertisers who will then see that this is an audience that they can buy airtime knowing that they're going to be watching.
Well, thank you. I just want to go back. You said something that really stayed with me, and that is the group that was, I guess, audited in a sense, for lack of a better term. The fact that just like the emotional outpouring on those Zoom sessions to do this research, were there then, was more space created for them to kind of, let it all out? Because I can imagine that this means that it was triggering in a sense.
Yeah, it was for a lot of people. And with the focus group, the audience survey doesn't have that same kind of focus group. There are individuals who are doing their media diaries. With the being seen study, as I mentioned, there are 400 people in these focus groups. And there was, as I said, a lot of emotion, a lot of support from each of the members of the focus group. They were closed groups so that there was a sense of safety in the space. And many of them asked afterwards if they could get the contact information of the people who were in the group, because they had very few opportunities to ever engage with those people who do the same kind of work, who have experienced the same kind of barriers that they've experienced. And particularly the people with disabilities, that group, they've never had the opportunity. To them, it was just like really, really heartfelt responses that they had to what they had experienced in the industry, because they've just been largely ignored and overlooked.
And feeling isolated, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hence the importance of, when we talk about equity and inclusion, belonging and access are just as important in the balance of things. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about is, you touched upon it in your presentation, and it's that idea of the pipeline, right? The talent pipeline. So for you, for BSO and your partners, what types of conversations have been happening, in parallel or within this process around how to address that? Like, what have been the thoughts or the things that have come up in those conversations?
One of the things that is that most of the initiatives that are happening right now are ecosystem change. So they're training and development programs, a lot of it for emerging talent, that doesn't actually guarantee that after you do that training that there's going to be anything for you, anywhere specific to go. So we're the programming that we are, trying to initiate our system changes. So that we're looking at working with, a potential broadcaster or distributor or even a funding agency to say, well, what are you going to do next year as the demand grows for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in your organizations? What can we do to ensure that we start to fill the pipeline? And it's not going to be with just programming that is training that is one-off, that although I think, you know, these programs are fantastic, there's a lot of really great information that's been disseminated, and a lot of people who have made connections within the industry have been able to pitch their projects. But we need to get to the root. We need to say to broadcasters, well, how are you going to get the next head of your development department? Where's that person going to come from? Or with broadcasters, with CMF, where's your next VP going to come from? How are you filling those board positions? So those are things that we have to look at. They take a long time to manifest, but we have to start somewhere, and the commitment has to be there. The accountability has to be there, and we need to know that they're going to be in it for the long term.
So multi-pronged push in a sense, right?
For sure.
Yeah. And for you personally, like what has this whole process, this research? No, actually, I want to go even further back, but how has this experience been for you, even like beginning with the beginning of you taking the mandate at the Black Screen Office, and then through, you know, these tactical steps of doing the research? Like, what has that been for you? And I'm asking because, you know, I know you've been in the industry a really, really long time, and you've worked at so many different leadership levels. So if you can talk to us a little bit about that, what it's been like for you, the BSO, the Black Screen Office experience, and all these technical steps and partnerships that have come through in the past 10 months, as you say.
It's not really, 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 really long. Anyway, I think everything that I've done up till now has kind of led to this place. I've been a very active advocate around these issues for a very long time. And in the work that I've done, equity and inclusion has always been at the forefront, from working to women in film to working at Vision TV, where I was able to create a program called Diverse TV, which gave some of our most senior Black producers and creatives their first opportunity ever to have a credit on television. And they are now the ones that you can't get because they are they're so busy. So I feel it's great to have been in the industry for this length of time, because I have met a lot of people and have a lot of relationships. It's meant that, you know, as we've started this organization, it hasn't felt like starting from scratch. Not only myself, but the entire board and founders I mentioned are the senior most people, Black people in the industry. So we have that, you know, that brain trust and experience of all of us that we brought to bear to this organization. And I think that's why we've been able to hit the ground running with the initiatives that we've undertaken, because we've been talking about them for a long time. We've been praying and hoping and working. And as opportunities have presented themselves, we've been prepared to step into them.
That's great. A question has come up in the chat, and it's something that, you know, I think is like a sub-subject of a lot of the structural things that we've been talking about, and kind of like who has control of the story. And that's around, you know, the fight for intellectual property, like all the issues surrounding intellectual property, who owns the story, how to ensure that those from underrepresented voices are empowered, supported to maintain ownership, and to not be stuck in many instances in this pattern of having to give that away in order to have the opportunity to see their story come through, right? Which also connects to when we look at production companies, like the lack of representation there in the leadership position. So what, you know, what's BSO's position on that, or does that inform like the work that you're doing and the research that you're doing as well, this issue? Because I've seen it pop up in many conversations with institutions and whatnot, and it's kind of hard to get an answer around that. And I know it's a complex issue.
It's hard to get an answer because people have different answers and different approaches. Some people, it's all about whose story is it to tell, and whose story is it to own. People are really divided around that question. Some people say it's never okay for you to tell my story. Some say sometimes it's okay if there's proper if there's a proper sort of scaffolding around the project, that there's been adequate research done, and then some people say there should be freedom of speech and freedom to write whatever you want to write. So it is across the board. But I think where most people land is that if anything is going to be done, it has to be done authentically. We have to know that the voices around the table represent the people who are a part of the people you see on screen, and that they need to have power and control in the room. They can't just be there for show. They have to be there to be listened to. And as much as possible, we want to make sure that if the experience level isn't there, that the opportunities are there to move forward on the next project and the next project to go higher and higher. And it will have to be fast tracked because we're so far behind. There's a reason why every Black person I know is working right now, is because it's a very thin layer of people who've been able to break through and get to that level where now they're in demand. But we don't have many people below that level in the mid-level range who are going to be able to step in or to fill the increased demand. So there are a lot of things that are going to have to change. And as I said, scaffolding is probably one of the most important things. It's like give the person the position and give them the help that they need in order to be successful at whatever it is that they're doing.
Thank you, Joan. Larissa Cristoforo is on camera and has a question that she'd like to run by you. And I'm checking the time, so I think it'll be the last question of our meeting. So Larissa, vas-y.
Yeah, hi, Joan. Thanks for this presentation. I have a lot of questions, in fact, but one of them is like, do you see any difference in a way you are, how you're taking into account these distinctions between the Francophone and the Anglophone context in this research? Because what I always think is that, unfortunately, the United States already feel this gap of need for representation on screen, right? Whenever we talk to BIPOC communities here and they have to mention any TV series or film, they are always talking about American works. So, and for the Canada, I think it's going to be very difficult because we need to have a stronger industry for us to overcome this market, right? Because it is being supplied by the United States. And for the Francophones, I think it's the opposite. We don't have it all. So maybe for the Francophone producers, whenever we have representation in French, we are going to have an audience. And in English, it's going to be more difficult. How are you dealing with that? How are you dealing with this difference? Like, beside the difference that even here in Quebec, we still don't have the government recognizing that we have systemic racism. So this is politics, but culturally, how this research is going to inform all this production and all these needs and these different needs in these different cultures here we have in Canada.
So one of the things that we've spent a lot of time on was talking about making sure that this was a study that was equally valuable for French Canada as it is for English Canada. so we have, to begin with, where we have a section just on Canadian content. We know that when you're going out to audiences, most of the people are going to be watching American programming. We already know that. But we wanted to ensure that we gave people an opportunity to talk about Canadian content. You know, the question is, do you know what Canadian content you are watching? And if you are watching it, why are you watching it? What do you like to see? Whatever. But we're asking that of French viewers as well as English viewers in Quebec and outside of Quebec. So the responses are going to be based on people's lived experiences from wherever they are. We can't say what the outcome will be. People will say what they want to say, but we want to be sure to make sure that this is not a report that's written in English and then translated into French. We want to be authentically making sure that the answers around French content is being asked and answered. And also, because there's this openness now for international content, I think there's an opportunity for French content to cross over into English Canada, which I think a lot of people have a desire to see happen. I've been hearing that even more among broadcasters, that they would like to bridge the divide. And hopefully this kind of study will help to open those conversations as well. I don't think the American hegemony is going to go away anytime soon, but I think there's work we can do, and moving forward, not only for Canadian content, but making sure that the Canadian content that we're looking at is representative of all people, so that as we're moving forward, we're looking at making content that appeals to an audience that we will now see, as opposed to an invisible audience who hadn't been counted in the past.
Thank you, Joan. I just want to be mindful of time. So it's 1:01 on my screen. So thank you so much, Joan. This was really an enriching conversation. And I think I can speak on behalf of Xn Québec that we can't wait to see what's next and to start seeing the results of this important work so that we can help disseminate it and we can help have it as a tool for the members of Xn Québec that are in the creative industries and beyond. So thank you again, Joan. I really, really appreciate your time and all your insight. Merci. Je veux remercier les membres du comité Équité et Inclusion d'Xn Québec, l'équipe d'Xn Québec également, et surtout vous d'être présents, d'avoir participé avec nous aujourd'hui. J'espère que ça a été enrichissant et que c'était très aidant pour vos réflexions par rapport aux enjeux de l'équité et de l'inclusion. Alors, merci encore une fois et à la prochaine.
And thank you also for the invitation. Okay.
Pleasure.